Okay, so in this class, we will cover basic theories of international relations, which are realism, liberalism, constructivism. The basic idea behind realism is that it has a few basic foundations, such as the most important thing is power, ability to influence other states. Ethics doesn't matter in international relations. Domestic political systems also don't matter in international relations according to realism. And why power is important? It's like human nature to strive for more power over others. And this idea of anarchic world, which means that basically there are no rules. And again, it's important to understand that realism, constructivism, liberalism, in terms of international relations, they are just theories. It's things created by scholars in the attempt to explain the world around us. Sometimes I see the students have some kind of issues. They think that realism, liberalism, constructivism, it's things that guide somebody's decision-making. It's not. It's just things created by scholars. That's it. Nobody else cares about those three theories besides scholars of international relations. Some basic assumptions of realism, so ideas on which realism is based, are based. So those ideas are nations are self-reliant, idea of a balance of power, countries strive to find a balance. For instance, during Cold War, there was a balance between United States and Soviet Union. And for instance, now in East Asia, you have a balance between United States, China, and Japan in that particular region now. Another thing is that unipolarity, which is kind of idea now that United States is the most powerful nation on the globe. It usually ends soon. Those conditions usually don't last very long. For instance, in 19th century, England was trying to balance between Russia and France, and Germany and Austria-Hungary. So this idea of balancing, countries trying to find a balance among each other, it's a basic conception, a basic idea of realism. Also, the same thing you have during Cold War, last century. So we have two basic blocks. One was United States and Britain, France, Japan, Western Germany, etc. And you have Soviet Union, and you have Poland, Eastern Germany, North Korea, China, etc. Currently, you might say that there is a unipolar world. We have United States, the most powerful country, and we have other countries like India, China, Russia, Japan, and like Union of countries, European Union, which are trying to balance the power that United States have on the international arena. Again, the next theory is liberalism, and again, it doesn't exist. It's just a thing created by scholars. You have to understand it. So they say scholars who try to think about international relations through a liberal lens, that there are other things beside power which are important, such as countries have common interests. For instance, the United States and Russia have a common interest in not using nuclear weapons against each other, because they have so many weapons that they can destroy the globe like several times over. So there is a mutual interest among the United States and Russia not to use nuclear weapons. Another thing is trade, the basic principle on which European Union was founded. Countries decided if you trade with each other, it will decrease the likelihood of repeating World War I and World War II. Some other ideas of liberalism about global order. It's important that we have a global market, that countries depend on each other, that countries want to have some rules based on which they behave in international arena. For instance, like you don't annex somebody else's territory or you get sanctions over it. Countries also want stability and predictability. For instance, in summer 2021, Russia was doing a military buildup on the border of Ukraine, and it created some major instability at the time. International relations are based on various institutions such as the United Nations and World Trade Organization, which try to regulate international relations. And last, there's this idea of international law. Countries usually try to apply those laws and try to behave accordingly. At least many democratic countries try to do it. And there are some very important institutions such as United Nations General Assembly. It's a gathering usually in September each year. Representatives from countries meet in New York and discuss international relations. We have some kind of like penalty system, International Court of Justice in Netherlands, in Hague, by countries who decided to join it. For instance, the United States is not subject to this court. United States thinks it shouldn't do it. And important organization, World Trade Organization, which tries to regulate world trade. Recently, at least in the last 4 years, it became less important because of the Trump idea that the United States should withdraw from international arena. It should behave unilaterally. Lately, during the first few months of the Biden administration, we can see that United States tend to be back on international arena and participate in various international organizations. Some basic principles of international law. Countries have sovereignty, which is ability to enforce a specific set of laws on a specific territory. International laws are mostly voluntary. Again, remember, the United States is not a part of International Court of Justice. And countries choose to cooperate and not to have a conflict. Well, if ideally it is so. This is why liberalism sometimes called idealism. Okay, another theory of international relations. And again, it's just a theory, thing created by scholars. Try to remember it. It doesn't exist. When politicians make decisions, they don't think, oh, I'm a realist, oh, I'm a liberal, or I'm a constructivist. They just make decisions. First, states are very different from each other. You have, for instance, Russia, which is a dictatorship, and you have United States, which is a democracy, right? Or China is also a dictatorship. So countries are very different. They have different constraints of their foreign policy. Political cultures shape foreign policy. It's very important. For instance, for the United States, at least sometimes presidents try to promote democracies abroad. And for instance, Russia just doesn't do it. Again, form of government is important for foreign policy making. What I mean by that, for instance, president usually is the most important figure in international relations in the United States, but Congress does pass a budget, and that budget includes, for instance, budget for Pentagon, for Defense Department, and budget for State Department. So legislative body does have some control over foreign policy, basically through money. Another way of Congress to control foreign policy is to, for instance, approve ambassadors, approve members of the cabinet, like Secretary of State. They're all approved by Senate. So, which means that a legislative body does have some control of foreign policy. It's not the case, for instance, in Russia or China. And again, domestic political trends, they have some influence on foreign policy. So, for instance, when Trump won, it was an idea that United States should deal with its own business. It shouldn't engage in international global affairs as much as previously. When Biden came to power, like consensus was that United States should be back. So domestic political debates do have influence on foreign policy. Oops. States have identity. It's the idea of constructivism. So America is a democracy, Russia is not, right? And those identities have some influence on how states behave, right? For instance, China has sensitivity to things which threaten its sovereignty. For instance, Taiwan subject is very sensitive for Chinese government, right? And United States, at least on many occasions, claimed that it wants to have more democratic countries around the globe because maybe I heard this idea, democracies usually don't engage in war with each other. So Russia was fearful of invasion throughout its whole history, and you can see how to kind of avoid invasion in terms of like neighbors invading it. Gradually it became larger and larger, so there's like nobody around who can invade it. So this is how Russian territory grew from 16th century to late 19th century. And the fear was that Russia was invaded all the time. For instance, in Middle Ages, it was invaded by Mongolia, and in 19th century, it has a bunch of wars with various countries. For instance, it was invaded by France. It has a bunch of wars with Turkey, and later in 20th century, Russia was invaded twice by Germany. So this fear of invasion is a sensitive thing for Russian government because it has some history behind it. And Woodrow Wilson, American president, said that democracy is basically important to preserve peace. He is important, I guess, pillar for international relations in terms of, for instance, if I remember right, he established a League of Nations, the thing that existed before United Nations as a way to prevent the global war again. And again, Bush said that America will promote democracy abroad because it will help to end global conflict. Again, democracies usually don't engage in war because cost of human life in democracies is usually pretty high. People vote in elections, and they can vote out politicians who engage in unnecessary war. Oops. Oh. And that's about it. Again, basic thing you have to remember, you have to understand those theories I talked about now, they're just ideas scholars use in the attempt to explain the world around us. That's it, nothing else.